In this video, we're going to be talking about slope. So, what is slope? Well, slope is the rate of change. But I bet you might know a different way of saying it. Some people say that it's the rise over the run. Some people say it's the amount of change that occurs in y as x changes. It just kind of depends. So think about how you might describe slope in your own words when we're all done. But your basic way of saying it, not really your basic, but kind of your official way of saying slope, is that slope is your rate of change. Well, what's the equation for slope? Slope is our measure of the change in y, which is our vertical change here. So this is the change that occurs in y over the change that occurs in x. So we call that our rise over our run. So our slope equation can be a couple different things. All right, so first, you could write it as your rise over your run. You could also say that it's the change in y divided by the change in x. And so just in case you didn't know that, let's go ahead and put that triangle means change or subtract. Like, what is the difference in those, right? Which means, really, when we're talking about the change of y and the change of x, we're saying to take that y2 value and the y1 value and find the difference. So subtract them and divide that by your x2 and your x1, right? So the change of y over the change of x, or your y2 minus your y1 over your x2 minus your x1. Now there are 4 different types of slope. There's positive slope, there's negative slope, there's zero slope, and undefined slope. But what do those look like? So when we have positive slope, it means that our slope is going to be going up, meaning as x increases, y increases. Negative slope is going to look a little bit different. So as x increases, y is going to decrease. So it's going to kind of go in a downward motion. Zero slope is going to be flat, like a flat line, meaning that there's no rise. All it does is run. And our undefined slope is going to be a vertical line. So here, there's no running, but our slope rises and falls. So when we have zero slope, that means that we're going to have a 0 over some number. And our undefined slope means that we'll have some number over 0, which you can't have. It's undefined. Let's do an example where we're going to see some graphs and decide what kind of slope they have. So here we're going to describe the slope of the line, and then we're going to find that slope. So take a look at our first picture here, and we see that we've got a vertical line, right? We've got a vertical line there, which means that our slope is undefined, right? Our slope, our m, is undefined. And we could definitely calculate that if we wanted to, where here we have our x1 value, and here's our x2 value, and here is our y1 value, and here is our y1 value, and our y2 value. So according to our equation, we can subtract those. So we'll take our y2, and we'll subtract our y1, and divide that by our x2, which is 3, minus our x1, which is 3. And when we calculate that, that's going to tell us that m equaled a negative 8 over 0. And remember, we said you can't have a 0 in the denominator, which is why it's undefined. Let's take a look at our next equation here. So here, as we look at our line, we see that as x is getting bigger, the y is also getting larger. So this tells us that our slope is going to be positive. Now there's a couple different ways that you can find slopes. You can calculate it or you can count it. Remember we talked about the rise and the run? Right, so remember we talked about how m can be our rise over our run. So if we look at our graph, we can come from, we have a couple points that have been given to us, right? This -1, -4, and this 3, 4. So we can say, how high do we have to go? How far do we rise to get there? And we see that we rise 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 places. And we run to get over to our other point 1, 2, 3, 4 places. So that's going to tell us that our rise is 8 and our run is 4. So our slope here is going to have the value 2. And notice that it's positive. So we've found our slope and we've also said what type of a slope we're going to have. Let's take a look at our third example. Here, when we look at our line, we see we have a straight line, and as x gets bigger, our y is going down. So that tells us that our slope value is negative. So we have a negative type of a slope, and now we can calculate it. So we have a couple choices. We could either count it with our rise and our run, or we could plug it into our formula. Either way. So let's go ahead and let's take our values. So we were given the -2, 3, and we were given the 3, 2. Let's go ahead and let's count those. So here we see that we're not going to rise as we move from left to right, but we're going to fall. We're going to fall 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to fall 5 values. And we're going to run. We still run into the right because we always move left to right. We're going to run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values. So we're going to run 5. So we set up our rise over our run. We're going to rise -5 because remember we're falling, and we're running 5 as well. And when we reduce that, we get a value of -1. And so that is our slope value, and we see that it is negative. So now you've seen how to calculate slope using the rise or the run, or using our equation.